Hey, happy Tuesday morning to you, everyone, and welcome back to Morning Musings. My name is Don K. Preston. I am the president of Preterist Research Institute of Ardmore, Oklahoma. Hey, it's really good to be back. Appreciate, by the way, the comments about my recap of yesterday, the recap of the previous year. I wasn't even able to share with you a tiny fraction, honestly, uh, of what exciting things are going on and the growth of the movement of covenant eschatology. It's just absolutely fantastic. Well, anyway, as I promised, I'm going to try to wind down this week our study of the 70 weeks of Daniel chapter 9. You see, our point in studying this is really twofold. Number one, to better understand that fantastic prophecy of Daniel chapter 9. Number two, to find out when the 70 weeks ended. Now, obviously, I have not dealt with the claims that are made by some that Daniel 9 has nothing to do with messianic prophecy, that it's concerned only with the time of Antiochus Epiphanes and the death of Onias, the priest, and on and on and on. To me, that is so totally untenable. I know that's the view of the liberal scholars, but I don't accept that view. I believe that the New Testament application of Daniel 9, obviously with other passages, proves beyond a shadow of a doubt that the New Testament writers applied Daniel messianically. So, our goal here has not been to focus on the time of Antiochus Epiphanes and what have you. My focus has been to determine, okay, if Daniel 9 is Antiochus Epiphanes, then when did the 70 weeks end? There are two major views of that among evangelical Christians who hold to the view that Daniel 9 is messianic. Number one is the view that the 70 weeks ended in 34-35 AD. Some place that, at the stoning of Stephen. Now, as I point out in my book, Seal Up Vision and Prophecy, many commentators have made the observation that just has the vision of Daniel 9 kind of running off into the sand. Where's the climactic consummation of this pivotal 70 weeks? Where is there any indication in the martyrdom of Stephen? Where is there a word about the consummation of the Old Testament prophecies? Not a word. But we do have Jesus' statement in Luke chapter 21 and 22 in regard to the fall of Jerusalem, which Daniel 9 clearly foretold. We have Jesus saying, "These be the days of vengeance in which all things that are written must be fulfilled." So while the death and martyrdom of Stephen has not one word in the text about it being the fulfillment of Old Testament prophecy and bringing, for instance, Daniel to its climax, we do have in the Olivet Discourse Jesus citing Daniel 9, saying it would be fulfilled in his generation and saying that would be the time of the fulfillment of all things written. In other words, by that time, the process of fulfillment that had begun with John and had continued through the ministry of Jesus, continued through the apostolic ministry, that process of fulfillment would be consummated, finalized in AD 70. So, the view that the 70 weeks ended in AD 34 or 35 really honestly has no textual justification for it. What I want to look at right now is something I introduced in our last video almost 2 weeks, well, it's been 2 weeks ago now, concerning that constituent element, 70 weeks are determined to bring in everlasting righteousness. What is that world of everlasting righteousness? Well, let's put it like this. The world of everlasting righteousness was the hope of Israel. Daniel 9 is about the hope of Israel, right? How in the world can anyone read Daniel chapter 9 and not get the idea that Daniel 9 is about the climactic consummation of Israel's hope. And by the way, that's one of the reasons I wrote this book, 70 Weeks Are Determined for the Resurrection. Yeah, resurrection was the hope of Israel. Acts 26, 6 and following. Acts 24, 14 and following. So here is Daniel predicting the arrival of the 70 weeks consummation, predicting the arrival of everlasting righteousness. Now, we are told, those who advocate the 34-35 AD terminus for the 70 weeks, well, they tell us, well, everlasting righteousness came at the cross. No, everlasting righteousness was introduced at the cross. It was not consummated. In Galatians chapter 5 and verse 5, Paul says, we, through the Spirit, eagerly await, and the Greek words that he used there, we are expecting it. 2,000 years ago, they were expecting the arrival of their hope of righteousness. So let me ask you a question. Since Paul said his eschatological hope, and Daniel 9 is clearly eschatological and soteriological, Paul said his eschatological hope was nothing but the hope of Israel found in Moses, the law, and the prophets. Acts 24. So here is Paul in Galatians chapter 5, eagerly anticipating the arrival of righteousness. Well, Paul, don't you know that righteousness fully arrived at the cross? Not in his paradigm, not in his theology. Not only that, Peter said that his doctrine of the day of, his doctrine of the day of the Lord had been iterated by Jesus, the apostles and prophets, and by the Old Covenant prophets. 2 Peter chapter 3, 1 and 2. He said that the Old Covenant prophets had foretold, watch this, the suffering of Christ and the glory to follow. 1 Peter chapter 1, 10 and following. Well, let's see. Daniel 9, along with other texts obviously, foretold the sufferings of Christ and the glory to follow, i.e., the everlasting world of righteousness. So here's Peter in 1 Peter chapter 1 saying that the salvation that he preached, the salvation to come at the day of the Lord, which he preached, was from the Old Covenant prophets who foretold the suffering of Christ and the glory to follow. Okay, so if what Peter is describing in the day of the Lord, foretold by the Old Testament prophets who foretold the suffering of Christ and the glory to follow, if that's not Daniel chapter 9, then the burden of proof lies on those who would deny it to show where Daniel 9, his expectation of the arrival of everlasting righteousness, is different from, let's say, the new heaven and the new earth of Isaiah 65 through 66. Where's the difference? There is no difference. Now watch this. Peter said in 2 Peter chapter 3, according to his promise, what promise? The Lord's promise, the promise of the other apostles, and the promise of the Old Testament prophets. According to his promise, we look for a new heaven and a new earth, wherein dwells righteousness. Is that a different righteousness from Daniel chapter 9? And the everlasting righteousness that would come at the end of the 70 weeks? Now look, if the everlasting righteousness would come within the 70 weeks, and it would, and if Paul was anticipating the arrival of that very righteousness, and he was, unless you can prove otherwise, and if Peter was still looking for the arrival of the world of everlasting righteousness, and he was. And he was looking for the arrival of the world of everlasting righteousness, foretold by the prophets who foretold the sufferings of Christ and the glory to follow. Then where's the distinction between the new heaven and new earth, wherein dwells righteousness, and the world of everlasting righteousness of Daniel 9:24? Where's the difference? Simply stated, there is no difference. And by the way, folks, if it's true that Peter was looking for the world of everlasting righteousness of Daniel chapter 9 to come at the day of the Lord, and if 2 Peter chapter 3 has not therefore been fulfilled as futurists claim, then that means that the 70 weeks have not been, after all, fulfilled. The implications of that are profound. So let me reiterate. If you take the view that the 70 weeks were fulfilled in AD 34 and 35, that means that the everlasting world of righteousness fully arrived in AD 34 and 35. What then was the everlasting righteousness that Paul was looking for? What was the new heaven and the new earth wherein dwells righteousness that Peter was looking for, that he said the Old Testament prophets who foretold it likewise said they were predicting the suffering of Christ and the glory to follow? What's the difference? Are there two different everlasting worlds of righteousness foretold in Scripture? If so, where's the proof? And if you can't prove that there are, and you can't, then that means the 70 weeks of Daniel chapter 9 were not finished, consummated, and finalized in AD 34 and 35. It means that Paul was looking for the consummation of the 70 weeks very soon, and it means that Peter was looking for the consummation of the 70 weeks. And when would that be? In the new creation, which is the finalization, the final fulfillment of Israel's feast days. Wow. Hey, look, I want to make a very, very special offer here. Okay? I've written 2 books on Daniel chapter 9. Seal It, Vision, and Prophecy, and 70 Weeks Are Determined for the Resurrection. If you bought these separately, it would cost you $35, okay, including shipping. However, for the month of January, that's all, just the month of January, I'm going to offer both of these books to you for $25 delivered. Okay? Now, there will be a banner up on my websites. Boy, Alan Morton does such a fantastic job doing all of this. Anyway, there will be a banner on my website. All you got to do is click on the banner. It'll march you right straight through it. It won't be long. It won't be complicated. Pardon me, it won't be hard. Both books, $25 postpaid. That will save you $10. Okay, on tomorrow's program, we're going to maybe finish up on our examination of Daniel's prediction that 70 weeks are determined to bring in everlasting righteousness, and we will go back to the book of Revelation where we spent a little bit of time earlier, but we will bring that home, especially in light of what we've seen today. You do not want to miss this, so we'll see you on the flip side.